Germany's most important industry is celebrating itself and its crown jewel, the car. But behind the scenes, the German auto sector is in deep trouble. Just like the broader economy, it's undergoing a painful transformation. At the International Auto Show in Munich, we're seeing new models, fresh innovations, and sobering numbers. Global demand for German cars is stalling. Economic uncertainty is shaking consumer confidence. China is dominating the electric vehicle market, and Donald Trump is pushing for higher tariffs on EU car imports. The result? Shrinking profits, shaken confidence, and thousands of jobs on the line. On To The Point, we ask Autoland's reckoning. Are German cars a thing of the past? Welcome to this week's To The Point. I'm Javier Arguedas. It's good to have you with us. Let's meet today's guests. Chris Reiter is a senior editor at Bloomberg News here in Berlin. My colleague Clifford Coonan is an editor and analyst at DW Business, specialized in Asia. And Vendeline von Bredow is the senior Germany correspondent for The Economist, based in Berlin, but joining us from London today. To all of you, welcome. And thank you for being with us. Chris, I'd like to start with you. We're seeing the world's top car makers showcase their newest models at the IAA Mobility Show in Munich. What are your takeaways when you see where the industry is headed?
Well, you see Germany is making an earnest effort to catch up to the Chinese manufacturers, which was bitterly necessary, having fallen behind over the past few years. So they're making a serious effort to catch up with technology. The big question for the German auto industry is, can they catch up on price?
And what does that require?
Well, it requires a lot more competitiveness. It requires, Germany needs to get faster in terms of innovation. The models that China's not standing still, as we've also seen in Munich. And China's cheaper. There's going to be a lot more cars coming here, despite tariffs that the EU has put on Chinese cars. So it's not going to get any easier for the German automakers. And not only do they have to keep up with technology, but they have to keep up with competitiveness and price, meanwhile fighting trade wars in main markets like China and also in the US.
Vendeline, it's certainly the end of an era. German cars were leading innovation and technologies for almost half a century. They're now running behind. How did that happen?
Well, Germany's car industry is still the most important industry in the country, right? How did it happen? Because Germany is the leader in 20th century technology in the combustion engine, but it is not a leader in EVs and the new technologies. So that's where Germany needs to catch up, both with its models, although I think Germany has been developing some very attractive EV models, but mostly the main problem is Germany as a business location, the high cost of making cars here in Germany. And that's where Germany really has a competitive disadvantage.
Clifford, the German car makers are still profitable, but the outlook is quite grim, with most of them losing at least a third of their revenue in the last quarter. Just how bad is the situation right now?
Well, it's particularly challenging for them because, as we're talking about, the competition with China is particularly intense, and really trying to look at how do you actually compete with China, because they have so many advantages in the Chinese market. I mean, I went about 20 years ago, I think it was, I went to visit BYD when it was still primarily a battery factory, and they were just starting to get into the technology, and it was amazing, some of the things that they were doing, and you just felt that it was a matter of time. And the German car makers have also had to deal with the fact that they want to grow in China itself. So they're trying to deal with two different problems. So ultimately, I think this is probably going to be the biggest challenge that they face. Although the signs from the Munich car show, auto show, were very interesting in that there does seem to be a certain resolve there, which has been missing for the last few years because of this maybe ambiguous approach to not wanting to harm the Chinese market, which is so important, while at the same time developing and staying competitive.
It's certainly a dilemma internationally and nationally. We're going to break that down. First, we're going to talk about the domestic issues here in Germany. Then we're going to go into the international challenges. Let's start with Germany and that auto show. Roaring engines, flashy muscle cars, and booth babes. That's all history at the International Auto Show in Munich. Today, it's all about smart mobility, competitive pricing, and a fierce global race for the future of driving.
The major German manufacturers are displaying their latest models, proudly showcasing their newly developed electric cars. Most exhibitors at the IAA still come from Germany, followed closely by China. Germany's most important industrial sector has always maintained close ties with politics, so it's no surprise that now, amid a crisis affecting an industry employing 770,000 people, someone is stepping in to offer hope. The car is a fundamental part of personal freedom and will continue to be so in the future. For Germany, this means the automotive industry is and will remain a key sector vital to our country's prosperity. German industry is in recession, partly due to heavy reliance on exports. The automotive sector is especially affected. The Chancellor has announced plans to soon convene an automotive summit. A study shows around 50,000 automotive jobs have been lost in Germany within a year, with more layoffs looming. We ask, how can the German automotive industry get out of this crisis?
A crisis that also involves consumers. Clifford, electric cars are set to be the future, and yet about 60% of German consumers say it's not an option for them to buy an electric vehicle. Why is the domestic market so reluctant on EVs?
I think there's a fondness for the internal combustion engine here that is partly, I think it's a very conservative market in many ways. Germany tends to be a slow adapter regardless of what technology it is in the last few years. I mean, we've seen it with the shift from CDs to online was very, very slow here. And it's kind of a similar impulse at work, I think, in the domestic market here in terms of demand for electric cars. There's also a feeling that there isn't yet the network there of charging stations, that the infrastructure isn't yet developed enough, and people want that to be much more reliable, I think, before they actually start investing heavily. So I think there's a combination of factors that is leading to this sort of conservative approach to adopting electric cars.
Car makers, Vendeline, often point to the government and to regulations and so on. Is this to blame on political decisions like insufficient charging stations, or maybe also the lack of subsidies that are insufficient for the industry?
Well, both. I mean, I think in cities, in big cities, it's fine. In a city like Berlin, you do find sufficient charging stations. But of course, the worry is if you, for instance, I don't know, drive from Berlin to Munich or even to a smaller village, I think people worry that they will not be able to refuel, so to speak. So that's number one. I think that network has to improve in Germany, but also Europe-wide, because of course people who have a car also want to go travel within Europe. And let's say if they were to go, in particular, to Eastern Europe, I think they may not get very far. So that's one thing. The other, of course, there were quite generous subsidies, but then Robert Habeck, the former economy minister, slashed them, and possibly prematurely. I think it was supposed to help lift off the EV consumption in Germany, and it did, but maybe it was cut too early.
Maybe consumers here won't have an option soon, because by 2035 the European Union plans to ban the sale of combustion engines here in the European Union. German car makers, Chris, seem to be on board at the beginning. Now they seem to be more reluctant. Why is that?
Well, because the combustion engine is the goose that laid the golden egg, and it keeps laying the golden egg. So, I mean, if they had to stop combustion engines from today and tomorrow, they'd be in a lot of trouble. And so they're looking to kind of prolong that egg laying as much as possible. And I think, though, some of the kind of comments that we're hearing is that, like, this debate also that's taking place within Germany and about whether the combustion engine continues, whether there's some flexibility in the EU regulations to ban it or not, is also holding back those decisions private consumers, and it also promotes this idea that the combustion engine is still the superior car, and it's being like taken away from you by Brussels, by regulation, and in some of those changes, those incentives and subsidy regimes that are in place, they still largely support the combustion engine vehicle, and that's been the case for decades. And so there's been sort of this half-hearted approach, a lot of lip service that started with Merkel, with like she had her target for 1 million electric cars on the road by 2020, never got anywhere close, never backed that up with subsidies. So there's always been like a bit of a half-hearted approach towards electric cars. And so because of that, so like it has, that idea has fixed itself in German minds that the combustion engine is better and superior. And so it's not that openness to it. And so there needs to be, and even with this debate now, whether the combustion engine ban can be watered down or flexible or whatever, at the end of the day, it harms like German industry in terms of of what direction they should go to. You can argue whether there should be a firm ban or not. There was like a target in Norway. Norway had a totally different policy. It's not in the EU, but it's basically 100% electric car market now, because they went a totally different path with incentives that made an electric car the obvious choice. And the EU approach is different. And all that kind of uncertainty that still exists from what we saw in Munich, with Merz sort of backing flexibility in EU regulation, with the manufacturers also saying we're not going to be able to get it done in time in 10 years, it sows doubt within the consumers and with the industry. And so like that, at the end of the day, isn't really very helpful for the industry itself and for Germany's ability to maintain itself as like an Autoland.
But it's sort of contradictory if we take a look at it, Clifford. On the one hand, we know that the combustion engine is still very important for car makers. On the other hand, we know that the future should go into EVs. So should the government push very hard for car makers to make that switch? Or should it not? If they're already losing, I'm seeing 140,000 jobs by 2035, if the ban on combustion engines continues.
Well, I think there needs to be a more resolute approach to this. And at the moment, you've had so many different policies and so many different approaches and so much consumer uncertainty about charging stations and that kind of thing, that you can sort of see that there is a need. But against the whole backdrop of this, of course, is that whether there is a future for manufacturing in Germany, and that's a big question that a lot of people are, that a lot of people in government are having to deal with now.
Vendeline, you wanted to jump in?
Yes, on the job losses, you mentioned the 50,000 jobs lost last year and the 140,000 that are forecast to go until 2035. I mean, that's a huge problem also for policymakers and for the companies themselves. These are brutal. And there's maybe one silver lining is the defense industry that, I mean, of course, they will not be able to compensate for all of that. But, there's one interesting development is that maybe some defense companies will be taking over some car production plants, that there's a little bit of a fallback as Europe is rearming.
What does this, however, mean for the smaller companies, the car part suppliers that are also the backbone of the German economy, if we're seeing all of these big car makers in crisis mode? That's also to you, Vendeline, sorry.
Sorry, the sound was for a moment
no
not
worries.
so good.
Yes, I'm going to repeat the question. No, I was wondering, what does this mean, even if the defense industry can save some of the jobs? What does this crisis mode among German car makers mean for the smaller companies, the car part suppliers that are the backbone of the German economy?
Well, they are suffering as much as the main industry. I mean, I just saw that Schaeffler is cutting job. That's a car supplier, and then many others. You have, hundreds, maybe thousands of Mittelstand companies that live off the car industry. So, this is a crisis, as it is Germany's biggest industry, really the backbone of German industry, that is affecting millions of jobs, and that's why it's so serious and frankly quite scary.
Is there any solution in the horizon, Chris, do you think, for these companies?
Yeah, I mean, I think. I feel like this is a typical German mentality that taking jobs away from the auto industry means giving up something it's like just losing, instead of, so you're losing, the auto industry is going to be smaller in the future. I mean, I don't think you can wash away that. The risk is, if you're worried about the auto industry being future, you have to pave the way for something else to grow. And that means innovation. That means maybe mobility firms. Like the auto was a mobility solution to begin with. It was to get from A to B. There's lots of other ways to do that now. Germany can invest more in that. Can Germany invest in the supply chain of that? Germany can invest in more fuel cells and more, there's all sorts of technologies that could still develop out of this transition. And so seeing it too much as a zero-sum game about seeing that the auto industry is going to get smaller and the fear that creates, it sort of blocks the interest in innovating and blocks that this is also a chance for German industry to evolve in a different way. And the risk is, and this is the political risk, that the politics looks to protect the auto industry too much and protect these jobs, and also in the supplier industry that are really future-oriented. They're not going to survive one way or another. So you have to, there has to be some creative destruction, and politics has to facilitate that creative destruction and facilitate a plan of what can move forward. What can you invest in that's better, that you'll need for the future industry? I mean, there are industries there. We know what they are, or just not even allow that innovation to take place.
If Germany doesn't go forward with that innovation, someone else will. We're going to broaden the perspective on the world stage. Germany is still one of the world's biggest car producers, but the industry is changing fast, driven by new technologies like artificial intelligence systems. And the global markets that Germany's export-heavy auto sector depends on, they're shifting too.
German car manufacturers are struggling, especially in China, where they were long the top sellers. Volkswagen sales alone have dropped by more than 8%. The main reasons? German cars are seen as too expensive, lacking innovation, and not digital enough. Meanwhile, Chinese competitors have doubled their market share in Europe, from 3% to 6%. The US is the second largest market for German car makers, with luxury models selling particularly well. But the market is becoming increasingly uncertain, partly due to Donald Trump and his unpredictable tariff policy. At times, he's pushed for 25% tariffs on EU car imports, then 15% as currently agreed. It was once just 2.5%. Artificial intelligence is rapidly transforming the automotive industry, from production and design to network integration and autonomous driving. While German car makers lead in autonomous driving, strict European data regulations are slowing innovation. China is already seen as a leader in automotive AI. Can Germany adapt to AI faster than it did to electric cars?
Clifford, you know the Chinese market very well. How are German cars perceived there? Is this a problem of manufacturers simply not delivering the product that the markets want?
Well, German cars have always had a great reputation in China. For a long time, Volkswagen was the dominant brand there. And Chinese products were always seen as inferior. They were often just direct rip-offs of the Jetta or the Passat, and then suddenly, in recent years, China invested billions in, the Chinese government invested billions in research and development. You had a lot of ideas that were, because you had these joint ventures, eventually the Chinese companies were able to make their own products that were really high quality. The yuan has always been kept at a very low level, so it's always enjoyed export advantage. It's had all these, and then of course there's subsidies, all these sort of things that basically Western, the US and Germany and all the Western manufacturers can't really replicate because it's a very different political system. That's in some way, Trump's tariffs are a response to this. And just as the tariffs on the European market are also based on the fact that there was higher tariffs in the US. In Europe for US cars, for example. But I think that's, when you combine all these things together, you can sort of see that China has suddenly become the innovation center, which you wouldn't have expected a few years ago. Even simple things like, with with charging stations, instead of having a charging station network, you just basically switch out the battery. These sort of these are the kind of ideas you used to get in Germany. You know, I mean, the combustion engine was invented here, but now everything really has shifted to China. And regardless of the fact if they had this unfair advantage, they have these various unfair advantages which are now being scrutinized. It's still become this innovative car market.
Vendeline, Germany is known as an innovative country. Still, in some industries, it still has an edge. Do you think that's going to be the case for the car industry in the future, or is this really something that Germany cannot catch up on?
No, I think Germany can catch up on, and it's Germany's great talent in a way. I mean, they're fantastic engineers. I just went to a conference on AI and the Mittelstand, and you know how the Mittelstand can harness the promises of AI for industry, for manufacturing. So and they're fantastic universities. I mean, I think that Germany has the ability and the talent to compete, but I think, but it's at a crossroads, right? And it has to really focus on that and realize that you can't continue to do what you did last century, right? And because German industry was thriving for such a long time and everything was so good, you know, it's probably hard to make that change to turn around the supertanker quickly, but it has to turn quite quickly these days.
It certainly is a very hard wake-up call. Chris, BMW is one of the companies that seems to be defying the status quo, announcing the biggest investment in the company's history. It could also be a very big risk, considering the circumstances and the outlook. Do you think that's the right approach?
Yeah, I mean, you got to get aggressive at this point. I mean, there's no sense in just sort of waiting and seeing. And I think kind of that ability to take a bet, to take risks is sort of exactly what Germany needs right now. Like, if you want to go back into German history, the only reason that Germany became really an auto country was like Bertha Benz, who did like an illegal joyride back in after her husband invented the car and it was sitting in the garage doing nothing. She's like, I got to take it out and do something. So that kind of swashbuckling mentality like needs to like sort of take place and sort of needs to, you know, start creating new startups. Actually, you know, like it's kind of one of the things. It's like that Germany used to have this mindset that like nobody else could compete with us in cars, and so. But, you know, Tesla came out of nowhere. The Chinese have come out of nowhere. And so Germany needs to have like a totally different mindset. And it just doesn't have to be limited to, you know, the risk of that it's just Volkswagen, BMW, and Mercedes, you know, and then we'll just leave it. But, you know, have this like, and that's politics, like in the idea of like, of supporting companies and ideas that you don't know they're going to work yet and not waiting for everything to be perfect. So yeah, it's good that BMW is going for it. I think the risk, going back to China, is that Germany served a purpose back in the day of teaching the Chinese how to make cars and how to produce a car, how to put like all those bits together. They've now mastered that. China doesn't really need Germany there anymore. And so the mindset, this idea that the German car makers might be able to just compete their way out of this rut that they're in China might be a bit naive and might be, you know, missing the reality of what's actually going on in China. And so the risk is that some of this investment pushes too hard into a market that is very state-controlled and where the German car makers on image have fallen down hard. And so the risk is that some of this investment, you know, is like falls into the sand. And they can't really compete their way out.
The other market that would be the salvation, if you will, would be the US. Vendeline, let's say German car makers do provide the products that the market wants at the prices that they should. We still have a trade war going on. How big a risk are those tariffs?
Well, they are. You know, the 15% tariffs is a problem, and it comes at a moment. At a particularly tough moment for the car industry in any case. But one mustn't forget that Germany is not the only country. I mean, America imposed tariffs on pretty much every other country in the world, right? And even higher tariffs on China and India. So in that sense, you know, of course, the tariffs make things tougher, but Germany's rivals have the same problem or an even bigger one. So America, I think, is the most promising market for European and car makers and German car makers in particular. And I think rather a little bit like we just said, rather than really try to compete in China, which is so tough and it's not a level playing field because of the role of the state in China, car makers should probably focus much more on the US as a very promising market.
We'll see how that goes. We have time for one closing question, which is the question of our show. I'm going to start with you, Vendeline. Are German cars a thing of the past?
No, they're not. I think that's premature to say that. But German car makers are at a crossroads, and now the next few years will really be decisive for the future of the industry.
Chris?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. They're not a thing of the past. The brands will still be around, but whether they play the same role in the auto industry in the future that they did in the past is the big question.
Over to you, Clifford.
Yeah, I think it's premature to say that. I think if Germany sticks to its guns, there's still fantastic expertise there, and there's still room for expansion, but maybe the role will change slightly.
It's going to be a bumpy road for sure, but consensus, it's not a thing of the past. Thank you very much, all three of you, for being here. Of course, to you for watching, and remember, you can always watch our shows on YouTube. Just search for DW News and the latest To The Point episode. Till next time, take care and goodbye.